In week 7 of term 3, there was an annual science fair held at the ASMS. Some students stayed back at school during this week and experienced the fair throughout the week, choosing a certain problem-based learning activity. However, I chose to go on one of the excursions, which were an option for this week. The excursion I went on was the Lake Eyre Basin field trip. The teachers which went along were Bronte and Jamo. Jamo's wife and young son also came along on the trip. There were approximately 18 students who went on this trip, which was from Monday until Friday. We got onto the bus Monday morning around 8:30 a.m. and travelled from the school until Port Augusta, where we had lunch around 1:30 p.m. After that, we moved on to Woomera, where we were staying the first night. When we arrived at Woomera, we first visited a rocket park where there were many sculptures of different rockets. What I learned while here was that Woomera is actually an Australian Defence Force base servicing the RAAF Woomera Test Range. That night we stayed in a motel. The next day we travelled further north of South Australia to Roxby Downs. At Roxby Downs we visited Olympic Dam as we did a very large tour of the whole place. Because of some security reasons, we were not allowed to take images of Olympic Dam while on the tour. After the Olympic Dam tour, we departed to Coward Springs, where we were to stay Tuesday and Wednesday night. On the way to Coward Springs, we stopped at Lake Eyre. Lake Eyre was a dry plain which looked like it went for miles and miles. The temperature when we were at Lake Eyre was extremely hot. The lake surface was actually a bit damp underneath the initial layer of dirt as we dug our shoes into it. Underneath was this sort of moist mud. We then kept travelling until we reached Coward Springs, and that is where we set up camp for Tuesday night and Wednesday night. Over the course of the next 2 days, Wednesday and Thursday, we split into groups. In my group there was Dylan, Jacoby, Ben and I. We travelled to nearby natural and man-made springs, and each group did a different experiment on these springs. Our group looked at the hardness of the mane and tail of each spring. Each spring had a mane where the water was sort of in a pond, and then it had a tail which led down away from the mane. We as a group collected water from the mane of each spring and the tail of each spring. Jamo had brought along a kit which gave us step by step on how to test the hardness, and it gave us the materials which were needed to test the hardness. We tested this on Wednesday and did the same on Thursday. We also did some group activities where we climbed a massive steep mountain and took pictures from the top. That was a really good experience. After collecting all of the results for the hardness of the water from the springs, we created a poster which we made like a scientific report. Thursday night we were back in Woomera staying in the motel. On Friday, we all were upset to be ending our trip as we all enjoyed ourselves so much. We left nice and early on Friday as it took us roughly 8 hours to get back to the school. On the way home, we also stopped by at Snowtown. Snowtown is a small town renowned for where the police found dead bodies in barrels in the town's bank. The murders were committed by 3 men who were later on caught and jailed. There is also an Australian horror movie called Snowtown, made based on these murders. It was pretty scary while we were there, as behind the bank where the dead bodies were found, there were 8 barrels just placed there. And when the murders were found, it was reported that the police found 8 bodies in 8 barrels. So that was really creepy. Overall, the experience was wonderful. I really enjoyed the week away from school and learning in a different environment to a school building. I believe over the week, the group of students became much closer friends, and it was a great experience to share with 3 of my best mates. At first, I was worried about the heat and how tiring the trip was going to be, but it was definitely worth it, and I would recommend it to everyone. This was the first sort of camping trip which I went on where we also did learning, which I really liked because it wasn't a waste of time, as we were learning very interesting things. This was a great week, and if I had the chance, I would do it all over again. Thank you for listening.